distance between your deepest sorrow and your true happiness is really but a moment. The space between an idea and its realization is but a holy second. And the distance between deep fear and a really difficult circumstance and complete freedom is really only a breath.
Welcome to Becoming You, where we apply spiritual wisdom and truth to your everyday life. I'm Terry Hasty, and in this episode, we're going to redefine time and our relationship to it.
And I'm Haydn Hasty, and thank you so much for being here.
So what time is it? Okay, I'm just joking, but think about it.
Good one.
How many times do we actually ask that? How often are we checking our watch or glancing at our phone? Seneca, the ancient Roman philosopher who lived really about the same time as Jesus, famously observed this exact human obsession. He noted that we're constantly complaining that life is too short, yet we live as if our hours are worthless. We're anxious about time dragging in the present while simultaneously lamenting how fast the years fly by. As he put it, it's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough if we invest it well.
That's really profound, and it shows that this really isn't just a modern digital age problem. It's a human one that's been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of asking, what time is it, maybe the real question should be, what is time? And it helps to know what we're actually dealing with.
So, exactly. So let's start with that. What is time? And here's the thing about the mind. What you can't see, you can't truly understand. And what you don't understand, you can't govern. And what you can't govern ends up governing you or running your life. And historically, I think time gets portrayed as this destructive linear force. It's like a slow march that ages, decays, dissolves everything in its path. But Hayden, you came to see time in a completely different way, didn't you?
Yes, I really did. And to your point, when we don't understand something as fundamental as time, then the default human reaction is fear because we
Absolutely.
don't understand it.
Mhm.
When we're young, we don't think much about time,
Mhm.
but as we age, time starts to feel like a ticking clock running out, bringing up this really deep underlying anxiety about death and, analyzing one's life. Did I live a good life, et cetera? Our lack of understanding fuels that fear.
I've often uh, referred to it as like a yellow jacket at the end of summer. Just, I'm running out of time. I got to sting somebody or I got to do something meaningful.
Well, what I learned completely changed my life forever because I want to unpack this properly, kind of going in
Mm.
a certain kind of order so that we don't end up wasting time.
Okay,
There's my joke.
fair enough.
Okay. Well, we're actually going to take a couple of episodes to really break this down so that you can get the real, hopefully transformational value out of this issue of understanding time.
And I've been thinking a lot about time lately too. Not that I haven't throughout my life, but specifically how to stop viewing it in such a linear way. And I think my own perspective is being really shaped now by where I am in life. Like my mom is turning 90 soon. We have 8 grandchildren. The youngest is just 2 years old. We have 4 grown kids at various stages. And here I am at 65. And time just feels different at every single one of these stages. So that's why I think it's great that we're taking time to unpack it. What is time?
Well, the first thing that I want to say, kind of a form of a disclaimer, is that I'm as much a student of this work as I am a teacher. I didn't figure out how to live the life that I live on my own. My relationship with Robert Wilkinson opened up a much deeper understanding of time and its purpose in our lives. And in fact, coming to terms with time, understanding what it is and why it exists, as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important things an individual can do But on this topic, essentially, we're all perpetual beginners. So,
Mhm.
let's get into it. At its highest level, if I provide a definition of time, time is a tool of the soul to enact the evolutionary process. That's what it's for. Time is a tool of the soul to enact the evolutionary process. Now, a different way of saying it is that time is the movement or the progression of God or the divine, the metaphysical, the absolute in the physical. Time's mechanism by which that consciousness or God bees and becomes. Believe it or not, time is a fully integrated mechanism and it is explosively creative in the manner in which it expresses that will that is contained within consciousness or God itself. So, if simplified, time is a tool that your existence uses to evolve, to become what it is capable of being. And once you pass away, you return to the eternal, to the timeless.
Well, that brings us right back to why most of us feel so uncomfortable with time. We don't view it as a creative tool or an ally. We view it as something to manage or fight or hold on to. I've thought of times in my life when I just wanted to freeze frame because everything seemed so perfect right then. I remember this soap opera when I was a kid. I can still kind of hear the music, The Days of Our Lives, and it had that famous intro. If you remember Hayden with the hourglass,
No, I never watched that.
we weren't allowed to watch them, but I just remember it would kinda like commercials. It said, "Like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives." And the words in that deep voice just felt so ominous, and the underlying message was, "You have 0 control, time's running out, just buckle up."
Right. And everybody knows that feeling where out of nowhere life throws something at you. Sometimes it's wonderful, sometimes it's devastating. And sometimes we understand why it happened, but most of the time we don't. And here's the critical point that if you don't become a student of your life, then you cannot master your life.
Mhm.
If you refuse to engage, you don't want to learn anything about time or your life or anything else. That's perfectly okay. There's no judgment of that. But you'll evolve very slowly and usually very painfully
Mhm.
because you'll be driven by what I call a conspiracy of circumstances. Remember that the soul doesn't judge an experience as good or bad. Pleasure and pain are really just two sides of the exact same dynamic um, aspect of growth. If you don't actively choose to involve, it's okay. Life will orchestrate the events to do it for you. And that's where it can get really messy. When you get caught up in a conspiracy of circumstances, you really quickly realize that you are not in the driver's seat anymore. But when you become a student of your life, you start to see the time as the precise framework allowing consciousness to express itself. Without time, your soul would be trapped inside of itself, essentially, inside of consciousness itself, completely unable to experience growth.
As a matter of fact, it kinda just retreats, or it says, "Well, there's nothing happening here for me," so just kinda go along with daily life.
Terry, our life together really has been a tapestry of these exact conspiracy of circumstances, events that
Mm.
in experiencing them felt so chaotic at the time. But actually, what was taking place, it was secretly guiding both of us to where we needed to be. And, looking back after a painful trial, as many people are able to do, when you realize that you landed in a far better place, it becomes obvious that you weren't so much the doer or the creator of the outcome. Something higher was at play.
Mhm.
So I was just thinking, do you want to share, a piece of that story about how you and I came together, how we ended up in Asheville to see what this thing called a conspiracy of circumstances really looks like in real life?
I love telling that story of how we came together. Remember years ago, we were sharing this story with our friend Greg, and he looked right at me and said, "Why on earth did you marry him?" When he was in that place in his life.
Well, you mean broke, depressed, zero aspects, prospects on the horizon.
Well,
I was in a death process. I literally was the old me was having to die.
well, I told him I decided to buy in when the stock was low. Of course, I never viewed you that way. But we knew we needed, when we first got married, a major reset. So we started applying for jobs all over Western North Carolina. We thought the mountains would be a healing place for us. We applied everywhere, even in tiny mountain towns like Silo and Spruce Pine. But despite all of our efforts and resume sending and phone calling and prayer and agonizing, absolutely nothing or very little was coming through. And toward the end of the summer, we took the kids, the three kids we had at the time, whitewater rafting. And on the drive home, Hayden, you said, "Hey, let me show you where my cousin Sammy went to school." And it was Christ School, which is an all boys Episcopal boarding school just outside of Asheville.
And, I had attended an Episcopal boarding school in Tennessee. So I thought it would be
Yeah.
neat for you to
Yeah.
see it.
So we pulled in the driveway at this beautiful campus, and all of us kind of tumbled out of our van, still wearing our wet rafting gear. And out of nowhere, a man just walked straight up to us to welcome us to campus. And he looked at me and said, he asked me, "Are you a teacher?" I said, "I am." And he said, "Are you an English teacher?" I said, "I am." And he looked at me and said, "We need one."
Boy, talk about a conspiracy of circumstances.
Right? He led me straight into the administration building to meet the headmaster, Father Ingersoll. But Father Ingersoll pretty much told me he'd already chosen someone for the position, and I assumed that door was closed. But when we got home, I called our friend Beverly and told her about going by the school. And she said, "I'm driving to Asheville tomorrow to clean out my aunt and uncle's house. Why don't you ride with me? You can drop off your resume. We'll hang out." Well, I agreed, but I didn't know she was picking me up at 5 a.m., but that worked out. We were at the school, back at the school by 8, and I dropped off my resume with the phone number where I was gonna be that day. Beverly and I spent the morning scrubbing floors and clearing out the house, and then the phone rang, and it was Father Ingersoll asking if I'd be willing to come back over to campus to interview with the head of the English department, Mary Jane, and I scrambled, changed out of my cleaning clothes into teacher clothes, went back over, and shortly after I got back to Beverly's, the phone rang a second time. It was Father Ingersoll again offering me the job. I had turned to Beverly really in disbelief, and she looked at me and said, "Well, do you want this house?"
I remember you calling me and explaining what had happened, and you said, "What should I do?" And I said, "Take it." It couldn't have been more perfect, but we're in the throes now of something that we are not controlling. It is
Right.
taking us into a whole different reality in life.
It was really incredible. And because it was a boarding school, our daughter Courtney, who was just starting kindergarten that year, could ride the bus straight to the school. From her school, our son Hayden Jr. got to attend Christ School for free, which was quite a bonus. And Hayden, you even ended up working there as the interim dean of curriculum while someone went on sabbatical for a year.
Right,
Look at
and I didn't have another job, and all of a sudden, here we are, both employed.
and in such a safe and beautiful place. And to use the word sanctuary would probably not be unfit or, it was accurate to describe it that way. It was such a safe place for us to land. And looking back, all that time I spent worrying, fretting, and asking, why isn't anything working out? Everything was working out. It was all unfolding in time.
And that was only the beginning of what was getting ready to happen and take place. Absolutely amazing. And so off we went, to a place I'd never even visited before. I'd never been to Asheville before. So when it comes to this understanding of the true nature of time, there are four individuals, at least in my life, who really helped me reshape my perspective. The first one was Peter Upinski. Well, that's the translation. I think he was Russian. Peter's the translation of his first name. But it was back in 1931 that he wrote in a book that time isn't a straight linear march into the void. It's actually a closed loop, a circle, so to speak. In 3 dimensions, we only see the straight line, but every living thing exists within a cycle of time. And then there was Isaac Bentov, who blew my mind in his internationally known book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum, with his diagrams hand drawn, showing how time and space interact with one another. And then there's the work of Patrizio Norelli Bachelet that cannot be discounted, even though very few have ever heard of her. And my mentor, Robert Wilkinson, who was a student of hers. Patrizia authored a book called The Gnostic Circle, which is, without exception, the most profound framework for time that I've ever encountered. That is not so much the book, but the map that she created called the Gnostic Circle. And working directly with Robert, who spent decades studying with her in India, my relationship with him and his teachings to me about time fundamentally changed my life. It was through them, alongside the spiritual teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, that, at least from my perspective, I certainly had increased my understanding of how time really works. And that's where I want us to go next with Robert's work and how the circular evolutionary model of time actually functions in your everyday life.
Robert and I had many conversations about time, and they really changed my understanding and acceptance of time and its purpose over time. I resisted for a while, but I came to understand what he was talking about. He said, many people familiar with astrology have witnessed the occurrence of certain coincidences between the events and experiences of their lives, the position of the planets in the heavens, and the cycles through which we are all passing. The most perceptive have observed that these coincidences occur in astonishingly systematic manner. The existence of such synchronicity will strongly suggest that the universe is a very different place than the one our modern worldview has assumed. He said the secrets of the universe can be unveiled by the human mind in conjunction with one's own lived experience, because the operative principles of the macrocosm are the same principles with which human experience is directly aligned and intimately familiar. Since the same center which gave birth to the universe is also the core of the human being, the unveiling of this soul center in the individual grants an immediate realization of truth consciousness or enlightenment. For this reason, applied cosmology or astrology represents a unique avenue into a new and enlightened worldview. The Gnostic Circle is the most effective method for achieving this new understanding because it deals with the soul or seed of the divine in each created thing and its relation to time and the process of becoming.
I love those quotes, but I also want to stress this is not an intellectual or academic concept. Each one of us is actually living this out, but we're not aware of it. Now, back in 1987, during a really profound spiritual experience that I had where I genuinely believed that I had died, it was an out-of-body experience. I actually experienced what Upinski and Robert wrote about. I was able to see the curvature of space and time and saw that time isn't linear, it's spherical. In that state, the distance and time between objects, it collapses.
Hmm.
It's instantaneous, all unfolding at the exact same time. And moving from where I thought I was to where I ended up took no time at all. It was not an experience of a journey. there was really no journey across space. It was just immediate presence, everything right there taking place. So when I talk about the spherical, multi-dimensional nature of time, it's not theory to me. I know that it's real. I've experienced it. And to say that that experience changed my life is an understatement. In truth, it's still changing my life
Mhm.
today.
I think those are difficult concepts, Hayden, and so I wanna unpack that
And I
concept,
understand that.
yeah, of spherical time, more carefully, especially this idea of the horizontal and the vertical planes. If time is the vehicle we use on our journey to grow and evolve, we all know how it feels in the moment. When the journey's joyful, time flies. When it's painful, time crawls or it grinds to a screeching halt. But time is actually the intersection, the nexus of two distinct dimensions of our lives, the vertical axis of the center and the horizontal plane.
So it's very simple. Just think of it as a cross.
Exactly. So the vertical axis represents the contracting pressure of consciousness. It's the spiritual realm, the unified whole, or you might think of it as God pressing down into your existence. And the horizontal plane represents space. It's your everyday life, your expanding experiences, and your outward becoming and growing. When life is flowing, we move outward across the horizontal plane, expanding into new experiences. But when life gets difficult, we get pulled inward along the vertical axis. It forces us to go deep. The key to understanding time is realizing that these two, the horizontal and vertical, are not separate. They are woven together, they're acting together at every single moment.
And working together. And that is the magic of it, as those vertical forces, the contracting forces, exerts pressure on your life, on your being that everybody goes through lots of times every
Mhm.
day, not just over a single lifetime, but across many lifetimes. The distance between you and that, meaning God, consciousness, etc., it begins to shrink. And eventually, at a almost precise point in that process, in that time space continuum, the space between you and God, the divine, will disappear. And all of a sudden, you realize that
Mhm.
you are it.
Wow.
You realize the truth of who you are. And here comes the experience of the eternal, the transcendence and the freedom from time itself. When that happens, you haven't just created a center in your life. You literally are in the process of becoming a center. And that takes work. And
Mhm.
that's lifetime after lifetime of work, but you've touched the very fulcrum of existence. And from that grounded foundation, you can begin to build your horizontal dreams and desires, not out of desperation or need, but simply because you choose to, as a joyful expression of who you consider you to be.
And that
Not what somebody wants from you, not what you think you ought to be, but who you truly are.
That really does, Hayden, redefine time, especially when we think of time in such a linear way. But if you don't understand this, then life can just feel like a crapshoot, or it's just accidental. You're just sitting around hoping and praying things will change, wishing your life was different, lying awake at night, begging the divine to intervene, just to get the outcomes that your fear tells you or my fear tells me that I need. And it's that kind of endless, repetitive, closed tape loop playing in the mind. It keeps accessing the same old information, the same worries, the same patterns, the same perception of time that never gave you what you wanted in the first place. But because it's all that the mind knows, we just kind of stay imprisoned in that and we keep living that Groundhog Day.
Well, this horizontal loop, this closed tape loop, is really the physical unfolding in your life, but it can be viewed from a vertical conceptual lens that Patrizio Norelli Bachelet called the Gnostic Circle. The Gnostic Circle allows anybody to measure the progression of any event in time, and it provides the means of assessing events relevant to time and place within kind of a much larger global universal context. And certainly it permits us to appreciate, if that's all we get out of it, to appreciate the interconnectedness of events through a unified spherical approach to time. The Gnostic Circle is really a yardstick which can be applied to any event, and by which that event or object may be made to reveal its intrinsic nature and objective value.
And if this is something that interests you or you'd like to explore further, there are a couple of ways you can do that. You can reach out to us directly. You can have individual sessions around your own Gnostic circle and where you are and the impacts on your life. And you could also consider joining our online community called Becoming You. And you can find out about all these opportunities at our website, truthspringasheville.com.
In ancient literature and tradition, there was a tool that was referred to as the goldenrod, and a lot of people have heard this term, which is the philosopher's stone. Its value really resided in the fact that because of its special relationship to time and space, it could provide an objective means to assess the truth conscious substance of any given situation or event or object. If I said it differently, it could objectively reveal the individual's inner pulse and place within the greater harmony of life on Earth within the solar system.
I think that's really powerful because there is a science to it.
Of course, but as I said, if all we get out of this is just developing maybe not just an appreciation, but maybe a curiosity that takes us to a deeper level of understanding, that it can be really valuable. But I really don't want to talk about the Gnostic
We'll talk about it in
circle.
the next episode.
Let's do it in the next episode because it takes a little time. But for the time being, it's just so valuable to understand that time is a tool of the soul to enact the evolutionary process. And so under that foundation, there's no such thing as meaninglessness. That everything that happens to you, including the things you don't understand, are vibrantly purposeful in the unfolding of your life process. And that includes back when you were telling the story about our first encounter with I don't know if it was the first encounter with a conspiracy of circumstances,
No.
but the death process that I was going through was absolutely crucial and purposeful. It was really almost preparation for what was coming down the road. But in order to be ready for what was coming down the road, the old me was going to have to die.
And that reminds me, Haydn, that I know now, in retrospect, I wished I could have known then in the immediate, but I now know deep in my bones that the events of your life aren't random, mysterious, or meaningless.
The exact opposite.
You can actually step back and learn how these forces work and see that everything, as chaotic or difficult as it may be at the time, is leading to something that is good for you. And when you do that, you become truly powerful. The circumstances of your life no longer get to dictate, how you feel or how much sleep you get or where you end up.
Well, think of it this way. The amount of suffering that you require in life in order to change is mathematically proportional to your level of conscious understanding of who you are and what you're doing here. So, like all of us, when we really don't know very much about who we are and what we're doing, we're going to encounter very difficult circumstances. There are those contracting forces that are going to force us to grow.
But if we can gain the knowledge and the tools of becoming, of our own learning and evolution, then we can master those forces and actually build your own version of heaven on earth, which is why I think we're here.
As a client told me one time, she said, I really don't like my job. I know that what I want to do and be is a dog groomer.
I remember that.
That was her love. That was
Yeah.
her passion. So within about a year, she had opened up her first shop. And I think it was like 2 years later, she had another shop across town. And here we go.
Yeah.
As the expanding and contracting forces and events in your life unfold, and you can see the positioning of that event on the Gnostic circle, you can really increase exponentially your understanding of why it's taking place.
And what's coming next.
Right. And why is it taking place? You know, each moment, each event is a part of your unique evolutionary process whose intention is to create the circumstances that in some point in time will evoke and result in your awakening and realization of who you are and what you're doing here. You know, while Robert was a significant teacher, I mean, Robert was a guru in his own right. He was also a student of this work of consciousness. He was a masterful astrologer, but as time went by, and as he pointed out to me, he said that he had realized that time was not about the astrological transits and the other central points in basic astrology, but that time was about the integrated cosmology of how the transcendent evolves in the physical world. And so, you know, if you don't get anything out of this, but what I'm getting ready to say, then, you know, then this episode will be worth it. And it's this, that at a most fundamental level, it's vital for you to understand that the unknown is not unknowable and that everything in your life is happening for a reason. And that reason is always good in spite of the pain that you may be experiencing that leads you moment by moment to that greater truth of who you are.
And when you step back, you can begin to witness this science of your life that is invisible, but there's a formula, if you will, for how to actually live. If you can accept the never-ending ebb and flow, the painful and the joyful, the terrifying and the loving, that gap between who you are and who you are here to be starts to close. And you begin to realize that the wisdom you've been searching for was inside you all along, just waiting to be discovered, waiting to be set free.
Well, you might think of it this way, is that the more conscious you become, the less suffering you require.
Mm.
It's not a necessary element in your life as much. As we said earlier, the distance between where you are and your greatest dreams is just a flicker.
Mhm.
Because time and space are curved, the distance between, as I said, your deepest sorrow and your true happiness is really just a moment. The space between an idea and its realization in your real physical life is just a holy second. And the distance between a very deep fear and complete freedom is really just a breath away. So, we're going to go into the Gnostic circle and the specific cycles of life in our next episode. It's such a delicious conversation, and it's a really powerful place to start in increasing one's appreciation and understanding of time.
You know, Hayden, when we choose to understand time, we transform the very quality of our lives. It's not about, oh, I'm running out of time or am I wasting my time? Time is simply the spiritual evolving in physical form. And that can take some pressure off of us. That physical form, of course, is you. The timeless can only manifest in time, which is why your life and your time is so sacred. Thank you so much for joining us on Becoming You, and we will see you next time. Well, that was my last reference to time. Take care.
You.
Thanks again.